Hola a todos, and welcome to the first episode of our Spanish lessons, where today we're going to be going over different Spanish greetings. Now, we're not only going to go over basic greetings, but also have a wide variety of these greetings, whether it's, hola, hello, to good morning, good afternoon, how are you doing, and different ways to say these things so you can express yourself in a way that's not monotonous, and it's not just saying the same thing over, like, ¿cómo estás? And you just repeat yourself. So the goal is that after this episode, you're going to be able to have multiple ways to express yourself when greeting others. And a big thing that I want to point out on is we're not only going to learn how to say it, but also really focus on the translation and know why we're saying it and how we're saying it and how this translates from Spanish to English, and really comprehending the grammar too, to kind of build upon that when you're speaking. Entonces vamos a empezar con el primer frase de hoy. Okay, we're going to start with our first phrase for today, which is going to be hola, hello. So this is just the basic way to say hello in Spanish, and it's going to be hola. Now, you can see it's spelled H-O-L-A. Now, that's one thing you want to be careful with. In terms of Spanish, the H is always going to be a silent. So when you're speaking, it's not going to be hola, like you're not going to hear that H sound, but it's going to be silent. So it's going to be hola, like if you were saying O-L-A. So hola. So you can practice that. Bueno, vamos a aprender el siguiente. Let's learn the next one, which now we're going to shift into the greetings of the time of day. So good morning, good afternoon, good night, or evening, and things like that. So for good morning, if we were to tell someone good morning, it would be buenos días. Buenos días. Now, we know this because the word for good is bueno, but since we're saying the direct translation would be good days. So it'd be buenos días, because días is going to be plural for days. So it'd be buenos días. Perfect. So once you've kind of practiced that and gone over it, our next word for good afternoon is going to be, or good evening also as well, is going to be buenas tardes. Buenas tardes. Now you can see this one, and as well as our word for good night, which we'll go ahead and learn that one too. So our word for good night is buenas noches. Buenas noches. Now, I don't know if you caught it, but the word for good morning, or the translation for good morning, it's buenos días. But when we look at good afternoon and good night, it's buenas tardes y buenas noches. Now, this is another important grammar concept. So we say buenos días because día, the word, is a masculine word. So it's el día. In Spanish, we have the masculine and the feminine nouns or subjects. And so for día, it's el día. So when we say good, when we describe it as like a good day, it's going to be buenos días. Buenos días. And on the other hand, for afternoon and night, we have buenas tardes y buenas noches. So for tarde, which is the word for afternoon, or also it can mean late, but that's a different translation. It's la tarde, it's feminine. So it'd be la tarde, we have buenas tardes. And the same thing for night, the word for night is noche, so it's la noche. So when we say good night, it's buenas noches. Perfect. So now we've learned how to say not only hello, but also if you were to greet someone, because you're not always going to walk up to them and just say hola, right? You want to have different ways, especially depending on the day, to talk with them. So now we can go up and say, if it's morning, we're going to work or something like that, you can say buenos días. Or, later around lunchtime, we have buenas tardes. And really, especially before bed, if you have a family member, it'd be buenas noches. Perfect. So now we're going to move into different greetings on how to ask someone, how they're doing. So our first one, which is the most common, which is directly translated, right, how are you, is going to be ¿Cómo estás? Or, right, there's two ways to say this, because in Spanish we have both informal and formal ways to say this when depending on our subject. So the informal way, which is for the subject tú, which is you, informal, is going to be ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo estás? And then when we're talking to our formal, in a formal manner, using the subject usted, which is you in a formal setting, it would be ¿Cómo está usted? Or ¿Cómo está usted? So this is because, right, we have these differences because ¿Cómo estás? Is for the verb to, and when you have to, so estar is the verb to be. So ¿Cómo is like how, in this case, it's going to be how, so ¿Cómo is how, and estar is to be, right, the verb to be. And so estar, when we conjugate it for to, right, the informal, it's a as ending, so it's ¿Cómo estás? So I'm talking to someone informally, I can ask them ¿Cómo estás? However, when we're talking to, maybe like our boss or a teacher or someone we want to show respect to, so usted is going to be conjugated in the same group as your él and ella, he, she, those third person pronouns. So that's going to be just as simple to estar, you just end in a, so está. ¿Cómo está usted? And oftentimes you'll add usted at the end to kind of clarify. So it'll be ¿Cómo está usted? Bueno, perfect. So now we've learned that basic way, ¿Cómo está? ¿Cómo estás? To talk with someone about how are you. But really the big thing with this episode is we want to have multiple ways to kind of interact and talk with people. So because you don't always want to just say, ¿Cómo estás? Right, to your friend. There's different ways that we say it in English, right? We have, how's it going? How have you been? Different ways to say that, and we're going to talk about this, also in Spanish. So the first one I want to cover is kind of a way to say, like, how's it going? Which is, once again, we're going to have a informal and formal way to say this. Now, they're very similar, just like ¿Cómo estás? And ¿Cómo está usted? Pero la primero, the first one, is ¿Cómo te vas? ¿Cómo te vas? That's going to be your tú form, informal way to say, how's it going? ¿Cómo te vas? And then in terms of the formal verb, it's going to be ¿Cómo le va? ¿Cómo le va? Is for that usted form. Perfect. And so, right, once again, we have ¿Cómo, this how, and then ir is going to be, that's your verb, like to go. In this case, we're conjugating just into the present form. So when we have to form, it's going to be vas. So ¿Cómo te vas? In addition, when we say ¿Cómo te vas? We have te, which is an object pronoun. Which, because in this case, ir, the verb ir, is going to be irse, it's going to be reflexive, which is how we're making it say, ¿Cómo te vas? How are you doing? How's it going? And so, in this case, right, that te is for the tú form, that informal you. But when we're saying it in the formal way, ¿Cómo le va? Right, we not only have vas becoming va, because it's in that same category as the third person pronoun conjugation, but also we have le instead of te, because the object pronoun also mirrors that conjugation, so it's also going to be that third in that same, we have él, ella, and then usted. We're all conjugated in the same manner. And so le is going to be part of that object pronoun that is in unison with the va. So once again, to say, how's it going to a friend? To a friend, very informally, it'd be ¿Cómo te vas? And then to someone to show respect would be ¿Cómo le va? Perfect. Another example, this one's much more informal. It would be, kind of like, what's up? For the most part, what's up? How's it going again? But just another way to say it would be ¿Qué tal? ¿Qué tal? So in this case, we have que, was, and this one doesn't really have a direct translation from Spanish to English, but right, it's just que tal is going to be, kind of that what's up, how's it going. There's no formal versus informal. This is just more of an informal in general when you're saying it. And so once again, que tal is going to be what's up, how you doing. All right, our fourth way to kind of ask someone, what's going on with him. This one is going to be, like, what's going on. The direct translation, it's not going to be exactly, you can use it directly. So the word is going to be ¿qué pasa? ¿Qué pasa? I would really translate this, be like, how are you doing? What's going on with you? The direct translation would be like, what happens? Technically, because pasar, the verb pasar, is to happen. But in this case, it's like, what's happening with you? We can think of it like that. So, ¿qué pasa? And yeah, this is just going to be ¿qué pasa? Pretty informal, nothing too crazy. But ¿qué pasa? What's going on with you? All right, perfect. And now our final way for this episode to talk about how someone is doing, kind of ask them on top of a greeting, would be ¿cómo has estado? Or ¿cómo ha estado? ¿Cómo has estado for the informal way to say this, or ¿cómo ha estado? Now this is going to be like, how's it been? How have you been? Right? Because once again, we have the verb estar, but it's in a different verb tense. It's in a more complicated verb tense, but so this specific verb tense of estar is like saying have been, like to be. It's kind of that have done something, have been. So in this case, that informal, it's ¿cómo has estado? ¿Cómo has estado? How have you been? And then if we want to say it a little more formally, it'd be ¿cómo ha estado? Once again, with those tú and then usted conjugations. Perfect. So now, from today, quick review. We've learned how to say hola, hello, to quickly greet someone. Depending on the type of day, we can say buenos dias, good morning, buenas tardes, good afternoon, and even buenas noches, good night, before bed. We've also learned 5 different ways to kind of ask someone how they're doing. ¿Cómo estás? Or ¿cómo está usted? ¿Cómo te vas? How's it going? ¿Cómo le va? ¿Qué tal? What's up? What's going on? ¿Qué pasa? What's happening with you? What's going on? And finally, ¿cómo ha estado? Or ¿cómo has estado? How have you been? How have you been recently? Things like that. Perfect. So learning all these different ways to communicate with people is awesome, especially with these greetings. Greetings are one of the crucial things when you're first learning a language, being able to go up and greet with someone and start the conversation, ask how they're doing. And now we just kind of have a little extra bonus thing I want to bring in, a little phrase you can add to kind of spice up, I guess, what you're saying, which is going to be todo bien, which this is going to be, it's basically saying like everything good, all good with you, because we have todo is like everything and bien is good. So todo bien, everything good. So you could combine this with a greeting when asking someone. So let's say you went up and you said, ¿Cómo te vas? ¿Todo bien? You could say, how's it going? Everything, everything going good? And so you can just kind of use that to combine with these greetings to express yourself more and show more proficiency, I guess, in the language. Perfect. Now that you've learned all these greetings, whenever you're talking with someone, you can start conversations out in many different ways, whether it's hola, ¿cómo te vas? ¿Qué tal? All these different ways you can start practicing and using in your daily life when using Spanish. Now that you know greetings, it's probably going to be important if someone asks you a greeting, right? If they were to ask you a greeting, you're going to want to know how to respond. And that's what our episode next week is going to be all about. It's going to be how to respond to greetings. Not only saying, I'm good, maybe I'm doing bad, or you want to express very specific feelings like, maybe I'm nervous for something. We're going to go really in depth on different ways to express yourself, different adjectives, and just many different ways to respond to greetings and tell people how you're feeling. I hope you guys have enjoyed this first episode and learned a lot about greeting people in Spanish and learning all these different phrases and words. And I hope that you will continue to join us on this journey from novice all the way working to the advanced level in proficiency as we work each and every single day to improve our Spanish. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode, and I will see you guys very soon. Nos vemos pronto.